Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to talk about the new Horus Heresy launch because I haven't really talked about it yet and people have been asking me my opinions and things, so I thought I would get it out there because there's a lot of positives to be said. I'm pretty hyped about the whole thing, but there's quite a few negatives as well. And this is one of those unscripted videos where I just go off on a rant, so grab a paintbrush and a cup of tea and sit down and have a paint away and listen to me gargle along in the background. I'm going to show you lots of images in the video as well of stuff that Games Workshop sent through to me, and they've sent it through to a lot of other content creators as well. So as ever, thank you to Games Workshop for sending this through so we can get our hands on it and have a good look at it and get our opinions and our stuff and things out to you guys. I think the first and biggest question people keep asking me is, will I be playing some Horus Heresy? And the answer to that is yes. I do have a Mechanicum army, and Games Workshop have released the roadmap, which you can go to the warhammercommunity.com. If you Google warhammercommunity.com, you'll find the Horus Heresy roadmap. So they do intend to release the Mechanicum book. I believe that's coming out in August. And then you've got Custodes and Sisters of Silence and Imperial Guard coming out later than that. There's also going to be Demons coming in, Demons of the Ruin Storm. So at this time, I don't really have an army to play Horus Heresy with. Well, I do, but I don't have any rules to play Horus Heresy with. So I am building a couple of legions. The plan is go big or go home. The plan is Survivors of Istvan 3 or Loyalists from Istvan 3. Want Emperor's Children, want Death Guard, want Lunar Wolves, not Sons of Horus, and I want some World Eaters from Istvan 3 and build up a few thousand points from each of those forces in there. I'm mainly drawn to these armies to collect because it's just so I want an army with Garrow in it, and an army, even though he wasn't there and he went on the Eisenstein, I want an army with Loken in it, I want an army with Soul Tarvitz in it, and they're all really cool. Plus, if I end up getting some collections of each of these legions, then I can play them as good guys and bad guys against each other. So yes, I'm hyped for playing this game, looking forward to doing Mechanicum, looking forward to doing the hobbying and building up the collections as I go, and you should be seeing them on Winter's SEO and on deploymentzone.tv. When the Mechanicum rules comes out, because that will probably be before I actually have an army up together. I'm thinking about hitting up denofImagination.com, my painting studio, to getting them to paint some Heresy love for me as well. Get it working, get it all up on the channel as quickly as I possibly can. So Heresy is here. Everyone's got Space Marines. GW thought everyone likes Space Marines. It's by far our biggest faction, so let's release a game where it's Space Marines on Space Marines, and then we'll sell a boatload. And it's also the Horus Heresy, so that's really big as well. It was really big at the end of 7th, so let's do this. And here we are, probably a bit too late because the Horus Heresy is gonna end, but you can see their intention here. Imagine in the future, imagine in a far future, which is grimdark and there is only war, that there is a sci-fi system, main core system 40k, and then there is a main fantasy system AOS, and then they've got all their other games. But those are the two big tabletop games, AOS and 40k. You can imagine in the grim darkness of the far future, there'll be 30k and 40k. And there'll be AOS and Warhammer Fantasy Battles, the old world. I think that's their intention, to have 4 main ranges. But yeah, so let's release Space Marines on Space Marines. Everyone collects Space Marines. Luton's got his Ultramarines. Valrak has got some yellow guys. Samuel L. Jackson collects Space Marines. Even my cat collects Space Marines. Everyone's got Space Marines. So here we go. Let's launch it. And boom, it comes out. And it's a modified version of the 7th edition rules. It's got 7th edition at its core, but the rules are chonky. And so there's a bunch of people out there who'll pick up this box set and I imagine look at all the rules, or look at and pick up the box set, pick up some models and make firstborn armies for Warhammer 40k rather than actually developing their own 30k army, because the rules seem a bit intimidating at the moment. I'll drop a link to Luton's video, and he literally says that out of the box. Like, how intimidating is this? There's this big chonky rule book here, and then there's these big chonky codexes as well. Games Workshop want to make rules that allow people to play the game. That was their whole thing way back in the day. Games Workshop didn't make any miniatures. Citadel Miniatures made the miniatures, and Games Workshop were a distribution company that distributed Dungeons and Dragons and box sets from over in America, and they had their White Dwarf and stuff like that. And someone at Games Workshop and Citadel Miniatures merged back in the 80s. And the intention was, well, Citadel Miniatures, you make the miniatures, and if Games Workshop, if we merge with you, then we will make game systems for the miniatures that we now own. Merge, buy, they came together. And then that was their business model. That's how Games Workshop grew. Games Workshop gobbled up Citadel Miniatures and then started making games to support the miniature range. And the intention is, if you make games that support a miniature range, then you might sell more miniatures. And here we are 30, 40 years later. And yes, they've sold a lot more miniatures, because if you make a game set that supports the miniatures, then people will play with them more. And if people play with their miniatures more, they're engaged with the product that you're selling more, and therefore they might buy more of the product. And indeed, people did buy more of the product. So it's clearly a formula that works. Then you have to ask yourself, how many rules do you need to get people interacting with their models, to get people playing the game? They could release a rule set that is 10,000 pages long. They could release a rule set that is 10 pages long. It's up to them to release what rules they want to release to support the selling of certain miniatures. And there's been really 3 editions of Warhammer 40k. There was first and second edition, then it changed in third, and the first and second edition were the same core rules. And then third edition through 7th edition was relatively the same core rules with lots of little tweaks along the way. And then you've got 8th and 9th edition, which is the same core rules, the same foundation, the same scaffolding holding the rule set together. They changed in 8th and 9th edition. They decided that the scaffolding, that the core rule set from 3rd through 7th had either become unwieldy or was perhaps too complicated, or for whatever reason, they trimmed the rules right back. In an 8th edition, it was an 8-page pamphlet that you could get for free and start playing the game straight away, and the shares had a massive surgence. It also correlated with people using smartphones more and more and more, and the rise of YouTube and small channels like mine and bigger channels like Luton and mini wargaming and things like that. It correlated with a surge of people seeing this product online on their phones. It was a good call on them to change the rule set and simplify it in some way. And then they dragged the kitten out of the basket and stamped on its head in 9th edition and made it really complicated again. But that's a whole other video. So they've released a core rule set that binds this thing together from a rule set that they already decided to scrap. And it's intimidating, and some people will not play with their miniatures more, because reading the whole rules and reading all the codexes and getting an army together isn't as simple as it might first seem. But more on that in a minute. No, let's dive into that right now. If you get past the rules barrier, what are the rules like? Well, as I said, it's 7th edition at its core, so that means you roll to hit, you roll to wound differently from 8th and 9th edition. The AP is different for those that don't know. I mean, in 40k right now, you have an AP value, an armor penetration value of your weapon, which modifies the armor of the thing that you're shooting at, up or down. So if you've got a high AP, it worsens the armor save of the target that you're shooting against. In this, it's core 7th edition rule set, so the AP value either beats the armor value of what you're shooting at, or it doesn't. Either you get a full armor save or you don't, and if you don't, then you're relying on invulnerable saves if you have them, or a cover save, which is typically a 6-up in this. But it's not 7th because they've changed lots of bits here or there. At its core, it's 7th, but 25-30% of the rules are a little bit different or completely new. You run differently in this. It's modified by initiative. You charge differently in this. If you fail a charge, you can still make a surge move. You can still move half your charge range. It's got vehicles in it from 7th edition vehicle rules with armor facing. So some vehicles have stronger armor on the front than on the rear. And then turret facing weapons, it matters which direction your vehicle is pivoted in. But skimmers and dreadnoughts aren't vehicles like they were in 7th. They just have extra wounds, and terminators have extra wounds. They're now 2-wound terminators. So loads of little changes like that make the game feel different from what it did before they changed the rules completely from 7th to 8th. And the other big new thing I'm sure everyone's heard about is the reactions in here. There are basically, you can make a reaction during the movement phase, you can make a reaction during the shooting phase, and you can make an A reaction during the fight phase. And typically you can only make one action per phase if you're the defensive player. If it's not your turn, then you're looking at what your opponent does in the move phase and making a reaction against that once. In the fight phase once, or in the shooting phase once, including shooting back at your targets or moving away from targets or moving closer to your targets. It makes the game more interactive. It's not you're having a go, your turn takes 20-30 minutes and I sit here and wait for you to finish your go. While you're having your go for 20-30 minutes or however long it might take, I'm sitting here thinking about whether I want to react to some of the things that you're doing. The reactions feel like stratagems, but they're very basic and they're in the core rulebook. Now there's ways to increase the number of reactions that you can do depending on warlord traits, and there's also some core reactions, some specific reactions, some special reactions, let's say special stratagems, that your legion might be able to do. An example, White Scars have a once per battle reaction. If an enemy unit goes within 12 inches of any White Scars unit, all White Scars unit within 12 inches of that unit, that enemy unit after it moved, they can all make a normal move. I think it's called chasing clouds or chasing shadows or something like that. So someone deep strikes in with some Terminators back in your lines, and there might be 3 White Scars units within 12 of them. You can now make all normal moves, including jump packs or vehicles moving a long distance away from this thing that deep struck in, and that's a once per game reaction. The Emperor's Children, for example, I declare a charge against that Emperor's Children unit, and they go, no, actually that's a unit of Terminators that you're charging once per battle. I'm going to charge you in your charge phase. So each legion has their own specific uber reaction that they can do once, which is really cool. So it's 7th edition at its core. It feels more like a battle simulator than the 9th edition rules do, because your vehicles will be moving and pivoting and moving at certain speeds. Units can typically only shoot and charge one unit at a time. You can't fire all over the place. Units can typically only fire one gun at a time, even if they're loaded up with 3. There's exceptions to this rule, of course. Dreadnoughts can fire at multiple things, and big super heavy tanks can do what they want. But each unit, the rules themselves are following a stricter order of operations. If I was starting the game, here's a good piece of advice for you. If you're looking at getting into Warhammer, the Horus Heresy, the best thing that you can do is start with just infantry. Get the box set, or get some infantry and some Terminators and your characters. Characters in this, independent characters, attach to units. They can stand off on their own, but if they stand off on their own, they can be shot at by anything on the battlefield. Typically what happens in 7th edition, typically what happens in Horus Heresy, is your characters attach to a unit and therefore buff that unit and can't be targeted. And when that unit shoots, the character shoots with it. When that unit charges, the characters charge with it. And so if you started off with just infantry and a couple of characters, then you're ignoring half of the rulebook straight away. The big chunky rulebook that you see, you're ignoring half of it, because there's a huge chunk in there that's dedicated to vehicles and dedicated transports and larger things, terrain, and there's interactions in there that won't affect you. So I would recommend anyone who wants to start the game, start off with infantry and play 2 or 3 games with your mates a couple of times just to get the core rules down. Shooting and initiative. Initiative is in here. What is initiative, you say? Well, in 40k, who charges first fights first. Or if you've got a fight first ability, you obviously fight first. In Warhammer the Horus Heresy and in old editions of 40k, you fight first if your initiative is higher than your opponent's. It doesn't matter if you charge or you get charged. If you've got a higher initiative than your opponent, you're going to fight first regardless of who charged who. You're a higher initiative. And typically characters and Primarchs and things like that have higher initiatives. So play with just infantry to start off with. Get your head around the core rules just to start with, and then add in some vehicles or some dreadnoughts or things like that. That's the way how I would start the game. The other big thing when it comes to rules, however, is the codexes are a big thumbs up from me. The codexes, although they are massive chunky books, you have to remember that that big chunky book for the Hereticus or that big chunky book for the Liber Astartes is actually 9 codexes. And all the unit options in there for 90% of all the legions is exactly the same. So everyone playing Horus Heresy, 90% of the options that you have are the same. The Force org charts are the same. There aren't any stratagems and relics and all those sorts of things. So it's just, this is my Force org, this is the pool that I draw from, and it's the same as you. And all the special rules that I have in this major pool are the same as you. The only changes are in the second half of the book, there's 9 legions worth of data. So it's like 9 sub-codexes. There's rules for Space Wolves, rules for Iron Hand, rules for Imperial Fist, rules for this, rules for that. Every single one of the legions has its own unique characters or units and or units. So they might have some specific Terminators that were around at the Horus Heresy for the Iron Hands. There might be some specific elite slot that was round at the time for the Emperor's Children. And they're in the bit at the back. And then at the bit at the back, because there are no stratagems and relics and none of the stuff like that, there's the flavor comes from the warlord that you add, because your warlord in this is critical and often buffs your army. And if he dies, then you lose those buffs. The flavor comes from your right of war, how you've assembled your army, what right of war have you picked. And your right of war is your way of playing with the miniatures that you have. Like you're bringing all dreadnoughts, or you're bringing this sort of list, or you might bring a right of war that allows you to outflank with a chunk of different units here or there. So how you're playing with the models that you've got. And then the flavor comes through basically the chapter tactics. So Imperial Fists hit better with bolters. Emperor's Children get an extra initiative, so fight first typically when they charge. Space Wolves can run and charge. Everyone's got a flavor to how they operate. And then if you really want to add some more flavor, chuck in a Primarch, because Primarchs just make your whole army a bit better while they're still alive and on the tabletop. So the codexes are actually a big thumbs up from me. When I got my head around the different selections in there and realized that everyone is has got the same baseline. It's fairer to start off with. It's more balanced to start off with. And then you add the flavor through the Legion stuff that you can do. And when you think about the Legion stuff you can do, there's only a couple of ways that you can add the Legion stuff that you do. It's not layer upon layer of I'm going to add this stratagem with this relic and then this warlord trait, and it's none of that stuff. It's very A, B, C, and it's easy to get your head around. The codexes. There was one more thing that I wanted to talk about, my brain. Oh yeah, I remember it. You can add a lot of flavor as well with Legion Centurions. Legion Centurions are basically build your own HQ unit. So there's 9 legions in each codex, and obviously each legion operated completely differently to other legions. Thousand Suns Centurions are not the same as a Space Wolf Centurion, or are not the same as a Wordbearer Centurion. A Wordbearer Centurion might be a chaplain. A Thousand Suns Centurion might be a librarian, etc., etc. So you can bring praetors, which are like chapter masters, and you can bring Legion command squads as HQs. You can even bring you can even bring a type of rhino, can't say the word now, a type of rhino as a HQ slot and stick it in the backfield. Or you can build your own HQ so that your legion functions completely differently to other legions, or has different, not completely differently, but your centurion operates differently, has different buffs and different negatives to other characters out there, to other HQ out there. There needs to be enough flavor in the build your own HQ slot so that when you build a Night Lord's Legion, that it feels Night Lords, and when you build an Iron Warriors Legion, that it feels like Iron Warriors, and that is in the HQ slot there. So massive thumbs up for the codexes. Another reason why I like the codexes as well is because there's only a couple of warlord traits per legion. There's not loads to pick from, there's just a couple, with the exception of Dark Angels, because First Legion and they have all the toys. When it comes to rites of war, you've got the generic rites of war, ways of assembling your army in the core rulebook, but the rites of war, most legions only have 2 legion-specific rites of war, 2 legion-specific ways of assembling or fighting with their legions. And I like that as well. It's not like 10 different choices. You're not drowned in choices. I think there was a deliberate attempt for Games Workshop has deliberately, to my mind, deliberately tried to make the codexes as accessible as possible. Have they done that because the core rules aren't? I don't know. But the codex is big thumbs up. And it doesn't mean, because everyone's drawing from... The variability in the codexes does mean that you can build legions that do feel very Night Lords, that do feel very Ultramarines, that do feel there's enough flavor, there's enough variability in there to not make it feel like, well, I'm playing with yellow Space Marines, you're playing with green Space Marines, let's go. By following, essentially as well, if you want to build a force, if you want to build an army, a detachment that fought on Isfahan 3, you can. If you want to build a detachment for boarding actions on a Space Hulk, you can. If you want to build a detachment that fought at Moloch, the massive war there, you can. There's enough variability in the codexes to allow you to do that. So, final thoughts. Massive thumbs up on the model range that we're releasing. Who would have thought that we'd have got so much in plastic, and we're going to see a lot of it spreading across the battlefields of the 31st and the 41st millennium. Massive thumbs up for the codexes as well. The Liber Hereticus and Liber Astartes, they are simple but variable. Massive variation but massive simplicity at the same time. And playing against an opponent who has got the same core mechanics as you, the same kind units as you, with the same special rules, it won't be like trying to out trick them or out gotcha them. It'll be about tactically positioning and baiting and drawing people in. And with the reactions in the main rules, it should feel like a more interactive game. Having said all the things that I've said, I am looking forward to playing Horus Heresy. I like playing with Space Marines, and I'm looking forward to playing with blast templates again and vehicle facing again. And I have some, I'm not like someone coming in completely fresh and chonk, here's the big book, read your way through that. I've got plenty of experience with playing with the older rule set, so it's not as much as a barrier to entry for me. And I am looking forward to playing old school games. It'll feel old school with heroes and characters from the books that I've read, trying to relive moments that happened during the Black Library series. It's going to be epic. Anyway, that's my first thoughts. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support me, consider becoming a channel member. I'll get more videos for joining deploymentzone.tv. Loads of videos on there. You can find me on Patreon. Anyway, stay safe, people. Happy wargaming.